everyone? Tyler DeLuca back here with my top takeaways from this past week in women's basketball. The expansion draft is on deck. As the time I'm recording this, it is on deck. We're definitely going to get into that next week. But this week was highlighted by the SEC ACC Challenge. What incredible hoops there were. Most notably, Notre Dame versus Texas. And I came away with a takeaway that I've had a lot this season already. But I need to make it clear because I still don't feel like the conversations are happening the way that they should be. There's no conversation that Hannah Hidalgo does not belong in. Paige Beckers is Paige Beckers. Juju Watkins is Juju Watkins. Hannah Hidalgo is on that tier. That's not taking anything away from Paige or Juju and the players that they are. They are phenomenal. Hannah Hidalgo is also phenomenal. And in that Notre Dame-Texas game, she showed it. And what's so incredible to me about Hannah Hidalgo is it's everything, frankly. It's anything that you could possibly want in a star player. She has star player skills with glue player mentality. She's getting on the floor. The energy that she brings is ridiculous. Not even just like on the court, like when she's diving for the balls or anything. Like I'm talking on the bench clapping, and there was a part on the broadcast where they showed Hannah clapping, and then Olivia Miles starts clapping towards the end of the game when stuff was getting wicked. She was smiling at the end of this game, going into the biggest plays of the game against an undefeated team after they had just lost back-to-back games. She's a basketball sicko in the most complimentary way, and I love it. I love it. She's been my favorite player to watch this season so far. And in this Texas game, she just continued to prove that she is in the top tier of women's basketball players. I think there's only 3 spots available, and she is in one of them. Man, what a game that was going into overtime. That finish from Olivia Miles at the end, and then obviously the foul that got called on Roy Harmon, or that sent Roy Harmon to the line, and we go to overtime. And Notre Dame, even with 6 players, just willed their way to this win. Obviously coming off the back of 2 losses, back-to-back losses. To me, going into this game, I was worried about Notre Dame because Texas isn't a team that you really bounce back against. They make your life hell. They make your life hell. Yet, that's exactly what Notre Dame did. This looked like the Notre Dame team that beat USC. Again, Texas is known. Vic Schaefer teams are known to just make games as nasty as possible, to throw you off a rhythm, to not allow you to even get into a rhythm in the first place. And frankly, they did a pretty solid job of that at times. But ultimately, Notre Dame found a way. And it was interesting because to me, the big difference in this game ultimately is that Notre Dame on defense was in a zone, and yet they covered so much more ground than like your kind of typical zone would because of how active their hands are. And frankly, Texas just doesn't have the shooting on the outside to really punish a zone with a drive and a kick or swinging the ball around. Like the things that you do to beat a zone, Texas didn't really possess that. You saw a little bit from Shea Hawley in the first half, but ultimately Texas doesn't really possess the facilities for that. Now, on the other hand, Texas is such an incredibly tough defense. So even though they were playing man-to-man, like they were kind of throwing different looks and whatnot, like I think the difference that it came down to in this game was that when Notre Dame was kicking out to the perimeter, when they were driving and kicking, whether it be Olivia or Hannah, when they were driving and kicking, there was just so much more of a threat on the outside, whether it be to shoot it, whether it be to make another play, to drive it, whatever it is. The offensive threat that Notre Dame had surrounding their star guards in Roy Harmon, and you can, Madison Booker isn't a guard, but the way she handles the ball, she might as well be on this team. It was just different, and I felt like it ultimately, that tallied up. Those plays tallied up, where Texas, whether it was getting trapped in the corner or just not having a 3-point shooter to spread the floor on it, ultimately, it kind of added up. And Madison Booker was also fantastic in this game. The 3-point shooting, I don't think it is a major problem. Obviously, something that she wants to grow into, I'm sure. But on a Texas team, with this team, not having 3-point shooting from Rory Harmon, not having 3-point shooting from Madison Booker, and you're normally running two bigs that neither of them stretch the floor, which is the bigs that they have on this roster. You got one player that can really actively shoot from the perimeter. And at times it can make Texas one-dimensional. They're incredibly talented, and a lot of the times they're able to make things so difficult for the other team that doesn't matter. But Notre Dame didn't kind of fall into that trap of how Texas likes to win games. And they're very successful, and they're very talented, and it works for Texas. But in this game in particular, it didn't. And I'm interested in seeing going forward with Texas, how does this create a blueprint of any type? And here's the thing. West Virginia kept it close. It was closer than it should be because there's a lot of stuff that happened at the end of that game. That is a high-pressure defense, but not a zone defense. They'll press you full court. They won't go in zone. Notre Dame can play you man-to-man. We saw that a lot in the USC game. They're incredibly capable of that. They are a very, very, very good defensive team. So, on a day-to-day, game-to-game basis, do I think that this is some formula to beat Texas? Not really, because you're not playing Notre Dame and a Notre Dame defense and a Notre Dame talent every game. But when you play South Carolina in the SEC, maybe even when you play an LSU in the SEC, even though the defense has not been great at times for LSU, is this a formula? When you get deep into March and you're playing a UCLA, when you're playing a USC, or even if this is a way for teams that have defensive issues to mask them through the zone by forcing Texas to beat them in ways that they don't really have currently the capability for. Is this a potential formula for Texas to lose games? I think it might be. Now, certainly we're going to have to watch and see how it plays out, and obviously Texas is going to adjust as well, so we'll have to just see what those adjustments are. But from the best game of the week, the SEC-ACC Challenge was phenomenal. I mean, the LSU-Stanford game goes into overtime. Stanford was also incredibly surprising. They dominated the paint against LSU. Just shocking, frankly. That is not... Stanford obviously has gone under the radar. You lose star players. You lose one of the greatest coaches to ever be on a sideline. Like, there was so many questions. And frankly, people didn't really have the game on their radar. And I don't... You know, I was watching it, but like from a general fan perspective, like, no one's been talking about Stanford. No one's been thinking about Stanford. So I don't necessarily blame them. But Stanford put everyone on notice. They don't win that game. They obviously lose in overtime, but they led that game literally from like the very beginning of the game. Like LSU, like I think made the first shot and then didn't lead after that when Stanford took the lead, and then tied it to go into overtime. They led like right at the end of the fourth quarter, then it ends up going to overtime. And then they just take it in overtime. It just felt like one of those games where like if you're going to pull off the upset, you got to do it in regulation. And ultimately Stanford wasn't able to do that. But incredibly impressive performance from Stanford in the sense of, yes, the coach is different, but Kate Pay has been on that staff for a very long time. She played at Stanford. The foundation, the principles, the values of the Stanford women's basketball program have not changed. And that standard for Stanford is very, very high. And so I don't know if it'll be this season. I could see them knocking off a potential good ACC team. Maybe they become the good ACC team this year. But don't sleep on Stanford. Don't sleep on Stanford. I think the biggest takeaway I had was second half Duke. First half Duke against South Carolina was not good. They put themselves in too big of a hole. They weren't able to come back. It is what it is. That was, to me, Duke of years past of that first half. The second half, that looked like a team that had evolved. The scoring was there. Yes, they were playing against more of South Carolina's reserves in that second half for the majority of the time. They didn't really drop off much once the starters came back in for South Carolina, but also the reserves of South Carolina are starters on 99% of the teams in the nation. So do with that as you will when it comes to the talent that they're playing against. But second half Duke looked like a team that are legit and have leveled up. The problem is for them, how can you get that over 40 minutes against a team like South Carolina that is a standard bearer in women's basketball? That's going to be a challenge for Duke going forward. But ultimately, the SEC ACC challenge was incredible hoops. But this time, next week, we'll have a new WNBA roster. We'll have more games this weekend. We have South Carolina TCU on Sunday. There's several big matchups across the board this weekend. It's going to be a lot to talk about. Women's basketball is a year-round sport. I'm here year-round to talk about it. I'll see you next time.